May 9, 1941. Mid-Atlantic, southwest of Iceland. The sea ran in grey ridges under a low sky, and the wind tore spray into a fine, stinging mist. Everything smelled of salt and cordite. Convoy OB 318 pushed west in 3 columns while the escorts hunted at the edges. ASDIC pings ticking like a metronome through steel and nerves. Threat felt close. HMS Abriesha got the contact first, a faint, hard echo under the swell, and turned in with depth charges set shallow while HMS Bulldog and HMS Broadway angled across to box the sound. The geometry tightened. Stand by to attack. Full ahead. The corvette's voice carried, and the sea behind her lifted in brown, boiling hills as the first pattern went over. The ocean answered. 40 metres below, Captain Lieutenant Fritz Julius Lemp, UI 110, Type IXB, felt the whole ring and the lights flicker as water and TNT shook compartments that smelled of oil and damp wool. Confidence slipped. He had hunted here before and trusted his steel. The Atlantic at night had been his cloak, the radio his reach, the enigma his secret. Faith felt earned. The second pattern walked closer, a hammer along the keel, and gauges quivered into the red while a pipe split, and the air grew sharp with battery acid. Control blawed away. "Alarm! Touching off!" The order came twisted by fear. Dive, then up, to buy a breath, but the boat fought back, balking like a wounded animal in the depth keeper's hands. Discipline strained. Lemp chose the surface to save men and command. Ballast blew, tanks hissed, and the bow punched up through steel grey into a world of wind, whitecaps, and the black knife of a destroyer's bow. Daylight felt hostile. Bridge hatches banged open, a white flag flashed, and men spilled out with hands high, the deck rolling under boots as Bulldog circled. Guns trained and voices raw in the spray. A predator paused. "Cease firing. Prepare to board." Captain Joe Baker. Cresswell snapped on Bulldog's bridge. The decision as clean as the wind off the bow. Opportunity sharpened. On UI 110's deck, Lemp shouted for scuttling charges and the dump of codebooks. But the seconds had grown treacherous, and panic spread faster than orders in the cold. Time betrayed him. Sub-Lieutenant David Baum took the first party over the side, revolver at his hip, signalman's bag slung for papers, oil and seawater mixing slick under his boots as he dropped into the black hull's open maw. Duty became daring. He found the radio room small and close, the air thick with burnt insulation and fear, a desk scattered with pads and wheels that did not look like victory until you knew their names. Recognition would come later. "We just grabbed everything we could lay hands on," Balmy would say years after, still surprised by the ordinary look of history. Honesty cut clear. An Enigma machine, 3-rotor M3. Black bakelite and brass. Sat bolted to the table like a typewriter for secrets, its plugboard snarled with cords, its rotors set to a moment in mid-ocean. Mystery had weight. Beside it lay the Kerr signal heft and Wetterkerschlow cell, short signal and weather keys, and a Kengruppenbuch that mapped trigrams to call signs. Paper that turned the Atlantic's whispers into maps if you could read them in time. Paper felt heavier than steel. Balm and his men filled the bag, and their coats with what they could carry, hands shaking from cold and urgency as they dumped books up to the waiting boat and shouted for more line. Speed became salvation. On Bulldog, a petty officer scribbled in the log, with spray blurred ink, boarded enemy submarine, removed cipher machine and documents, attempted tow commenced. History wrote in present tense. "Keep it quiet," Baker Cresswell said to his bridge edge in a voice that carried farther than the wind, signalling Broadway to take prisoners without talk and Bulldog to make for the tow. Secrecy grew roots. Below decks on the U-boat, men still moved in the gloom, the battery fumes biting deep while water crept and bulkheads complained as if alive. The hull had a voice. Lemp, realizing his boat might be taken alive, broke for the rail to reboard. Some say to finish the scuttle, others to die with his command, and vanished into the grey water between waves. Command ended in silence. Cables took the strain and the U-boat staggered forward under tow, bow high and stubborn. Men on Bulldog's foredeck squinting through spray as if willing steel to obey. Hope fought physics. Hours later, with codebooks safe and the sea growing meaner, the dead boat lost its fight and slid under. A black shape swallowed without ceremony, as if the ocean resented the theft. Secrets went down late. Back at sea level, Balmy's damp bag lay in a wardroom under armed guard, and miles away in a Buckinghamshire park a quiet set of huts would soon turn those wet pages into a new grammar for war. A whisper became a language. They would call it Operation Primrose, and keep it from daylight, because the value of a stolen voice lay in the silence that followed, not in the shout. Caution became power. In that cold, spray-slick noon, when a black hull surfaced where it should have died, and a young officer put brass and paper in a bag, the certainty of an empire's cipher stumbled on a wave. The Nazis believed their secrets were safe, until a broken U-boat's open hatch gave them away. By spring 1941, the Battle of the Atlantic was a knife fight in fog, convoys inching along plotted zigzags while boats hunted by radio, periscope, and the confidence of an unbreakable cipher. Belief hid the blade. Karl Nitz's BDU in Kurneval stitched the ocean together with short, high-frequency signals. Contact reports, weather, rendezvous, encrypted on naval Enigma and sent to Wolfpack spread from Iceland to the Bay of Biscay. Coordination was power. The machine at the centre looked ordinary and felt invincible. A 3-rotor Enigma M3 with a plugboard. Rotors chosen and ordered daily ring set, and Stecker leads swapping letters into a combinatorial night. Complexity became comfort. German signals officers repeated a mantra that sounded like math. Astronomical settings, new keys each day. Strict discipline. And logs note de Nitz's conviction. Ich bin überzeugt, der Gegner liest an sehr Funksbrut nicht. Certainty dulled caution. On the surface, U-boats moved like dark punctuation between waves. Type Versary for the North Atlantic lanes. Long-legged Type Ajax for distant waters. Diesels roaring at 17 knots, electric motors humming to 7 below, 4 bow tubes and 2 stern, and a 10.5 cm deck gun for lonely targets. Steel wore patience. Their doctrine made the radio both lifeline and mask. Kurzsignal compressed reports into seconds. Pre-arranged call sign books, Kengruppen, and short signal books, Signal heft, trimmed words into code groups, BDU could expand at a glance. Brevity felt safe. Across the water, Britain built a different weapon. An integrated nervous system that ran from rusted trawlers to quiet country huts. Corvettes with ASDIC to hold contacts. Destroyers with 100 cm radar to find conning towers in rain, and Bletchley Park to hear what steel could not. Information became an arm. In Hut 8, Alan Turing and his team attacked naval Enigma specifically, working Banburismus, scoring on reams of paper and driving great electromechanical bombs built by the British Tabulating Machine Company under Harold Doc Keane. Ingenuity found rhythm. Cribs, predictable phrases, were gold, NIRF2, in weather messages, signal headers, salutations, and the tight format of Kurzsignal themselves offered a fingernail under the cipher's lid if the day's key could be glimpsed. Patterns betrayed pride. Still, naval Enigma was the hardest target, stricter procedures than the Army and Air Force nets, careful radio discipline, and Atlantic key nets like Dolphin, guarded by officers who believed procedure equaled proof. Toughness slowed progress. Churchill's appetite was blunt. Action this day. But even prime ministerial urgency could not replace the one thing Hut 8 most needed: current key documents that turned guesswork into certainty before convoys ran out of luck. Time punished delay. At sea, escorts learned to treat radio like spore. Shore HFD-DF stations and shipborne huff-duff sets took bearings on the very transmissions BDU needed for control, drawing X on wet charts while officers listened for a second spike to confirm. Listening set the trap. The stakes were not academic. They were tonnage men. And the thin bread of an island at war, because each U-boat's success cut into Britain's margin of survival, and each day without a readable key meant convoys sailed under guesswork. Necessity felt personal. Into that pressure stepped a corvette's ASDIC ping, a destroyer's captain willing to risk a boarding, and a young sub-lieutenant who knew a typewriter-shaped thing when he saw it and called it by name. Chance met preparation. Operation Primrose, the codename for the seizure of UA 110's cryptographic hall, would be written in the thinnest ink and shown to the fewest eyes, because its value depended on German ignorance that anything at all had changed. Silence became a tool. In the days after the boarding, the bag from a black hole would land in Hut 8 and Hut 4, and men with bad coffee and sharper pencils would turn the short signal and weather tables into cribs that let the bombs bite into. Dolphin. Keys. Paper unlocked iron. For months, naval enigma traffic that had been an iron wall turned porous. Convoys rerouted from ambush points, wolf packs found before they formed, and BDU's confident orders arriving late to seas already empty of prey. Outcomes moved first. German faith in the cipher held. D. Nitz later wrote that Enigma remained secure, and that losses must have other causes, and the U-boat arm adjusted tactics, rather than assumptions as summer wore on. Misreading fed attrition. The contrast could not have been sharper: a navy that trusted secrecy like armour, and a coalition that treated secrecy as a system of habits that could be mapped, mined, and made to speak. Viewpoints diverged. OB 318's brief fight, and a destroyer's hard turn across grey water mattered, because they gave Bletchley Park the missing calendar and the missing words, and for a time the Atlantic stopped being a blindfold test. Vision replaced hope. The Nazis believed their secrets were safe behind wires, rotors, and rules. The Allies learned that a single open hatch could unwrite a doctrine built on certainty, and the ocean decided to keep a different secret. Naval Enigma M3 looked like a black typewriter with a conscience, 3 rotor windows, a lamp board, a plug board snarled with stecker leads, and a clack that sounded like certainty. Illusion wore Bakelite. The Navy's version was nastier than the Army's one. Rotors chosen 3, at a time from a larger naval set, rings offset to hide turnover, and a plug board that swapped up to 10 letter pairs before and after the rotor maze. Complexity bred confidence. Daily keys set the order and ring stellung. Message indicators were wrapped in procedures meant to strangle cribs at birth, and Kurzignale compressed long reports into tight groups BDU could expand with a book and a glance. Brevity felt safe. Mathematically, it was a cliff. Billions upon billions of settings for Hut 8 to climb before breakfast. And signals officers repeated the line that kept the fleet steady. Ich bin überzeugt, der Gegner liest unser Funkspruch nicht. Faith dulled caution. The U-boat that carried it was a creature of reach, type IXB, roughly 76 metres long, over €1.50 tons on the surface, 18 knots on twin-man diesels, near 12,000 nautical miles range at 10 knots. A 4 bow tubes and 2 stern, a 10.5 IC Embles deck gun forward. Endurance had a hull. She could dive in half a minute and settle at 7 knots on electric motors. Batteries ticking and air growing heavy, while hydrophones listened to the sea like a stethoscope on a giant's chest. Silence had craft. Doctrine tied steel to either patrol lines, strung across convoy routes, contact reports in seconds, weather signals in fixed formats, and BDU at Carnival knitting the far Atlantic into a single mind by high-frequency skywave. Coordination made reach. Each message had a ritual. Choose a rotor start, encipher a short message key, set. Then type the text into lamps that lied consistently, while the Kengruppen-Butch mapped trigram indicators to nets like Dolphin. The Grand U-boat circuit. Procedure replaced doubt. On the other shore, engineering answered with organization. Y stations from Scarborough to Iceland caught the spray of dots and dashes. Teleprinters fed huts at Bletchley Park, and Hut 8's long tables filled with Banbury sheets and pencil lines. Listening built a factory. Alan Turing's team ran Banburismus, a paper, and probability grind that scored likely rotor orders before the bombs. Electromechanical stacks of spinning drums. Tested menus against cribs in the night. Math learned rhythm. Cribs were prayers with logic, the fixed weather preamble, the rigid structure of Kurzsignal, the habit of NW, ETR, HEU2, living in a format no commander believed could harm him, because the cipher should have swallowed it whole. Predictability betrayed pride. Sometimes you could feel a day's key as a texture. One codebreaker later remembered, hands hovering over a menu while the bomby racks clattered in the next room like distant rain. Intuition met iron. Operation Primrose added the missing grammar. U-110's Kurzsignal heft, Wetaker Schlosel, and Kengruppen tables gave Hut 8 the expansion and indicator logic to turn guesses into openings and openings into settings, before the day's key went cold. Paper became leverage. The machine's character extended past its rotors into rules. Change keys at midnight. Guard the books with your life. Dump them at the edge of loss. And the doctrine failed at the speed of panic on a wet deck under gunfire. Discipline failed seconds. British doctrine moved the other way. Quiet hands and layered instruments, ASDIC to hold a contact, depth charges to lift it, a boarding on the surface if the sea allowed, and a wall of secrecy around any prize that came up out of grey water. Process protected payoff. After Bulldog's party cleared the radio room, Admiralty signals stamped most TEC rat, segregated prisoners, and let the ocean erase the scene. The cover story was silence, because the value of the haul lived in Germany not knowing it had been hauled. Security wore absence. In Buckinghamshire, the books landed in Hut 8 and Hut 49 Naval Section read the traffic. Hut 8 broke the daily riddles, and the submarine tracking room at the Admiralty, under Commander Roger Wynne, fused Ultra with HFKDF bearings to bend convoys around waiting wolves. Intelligence became steering. Convoy rerouted, pack missed by 60 miles. Would be the dry payoff in an ops note, a line that hid the chain from a damp satchel on a destroyer to a pencil mark on a map that saved 40 hulls. Minimal words, maximal weight. For months in 1941, Naval Enigma on Dolphin ran porous, then tightened, then opened again with captures from weather ships like MU Nenchen and Lauenburg, a pulse the codebreakers learned to ride with cribs, discipline, and newer bombs. Progress felt tidal. The Germans shifted procedures, rotated keys, and believed the machine had not failed when UI boats later went to the 4-rotor M4, Triton, Cyalide, Shark, in February 1942. Darkness fell again until a later, deadly boarding in the Mediterranean pried loose fresh books. Change bought time. Yet the shape of the fight had altered. Enigma was no longer a wall but a door that could be opened if paper and timing came together, and sea doctrine now bent to make that moment possible whenever steel and weather allowed a boarding. Tactics learned patience. Captured cipher matter invaluable. An Admiralty appreciation wrote with English understatement, but most effective when not revealed by subsequent action. Restraint became weapon. The machine's character, then, was not merely its gears and wires, but the culture around it: German faith in procedure and brevity, British faith in systems and secrecy, and the grey, practical bravery required to step through an open hatch with a bag. Metal reflected minds, and in that meeting of disciplines, a rotor's click, a book's table, a yeoman's bearing, a captain's order, the Atlantic learned that a cipher can be perfect and still perish in a minute of cold. Chaotic Saltwater, May 9, 1941, OB 318, grey seas shouldering at the plates. HMS Obriisha held the Aztec contact, while HMS Bulldog and HMS Broadway slid onto converging tracks that looked like intent drawn with wake. The ocean tightened its circle. A Type IXB broke surface in a ragged boil, U1N, her bow high, decks awash. Men tumbling from the conning tower as if the boat herself had spit them out. Surprise cut both ways. On Bulldog's bridge, Captain Joe Baker Cresswell watched through sleet-shined glass and did the one thing that preserved the moment. Cease firing. Prepare to board. A command recorded in a cool hand on a wet log. Restraint became weapon. Fritz Julius Lemp, who had stalked these lanes with quiet certainty, shouted for scuttling and code destruction as spray blew sideways, and the hull shuddered under her own bad luck. Reflex met chaos. A boarding whiler clawed across the chop. Sub. Lieutenant David Balm crouched in the bow with a revolver and a signalman's satchel, his face beaded with cold and the taste of battery acid already in the wind. A young man crossed a line. Boarded enemy submarine. Found cipher machine and documents, passing up to whaler. Bulldog's book would later read in smudged ink, the sentence the only flourish allowed for a theft done in daylight. History kept its head down. Inside the radio room the air was hot, wet, and close, with the smell of burnt insulation caught under the ceiling and the lampboard's dust dimmed by spray. Secrecy looked ordinary. Balmai's men worked by instinct. We just grabbed everything we could lay hands on and passed it out onto the casing. He would recall, still baffled by how light victory felt in the hand. Honesty rang true. The Enigma sat bolted to its table, M3 naval, with rotors set and steckerboard laced, while codebooks lay within the arc of an elbow. Signal heft for short signals, indicator groups, key sheets, weather and call sign tables. Paper outweighed steel. On the casing, sailors stuffed wet pads into a bag that sagged with salt. A petty officer swore about the straps, and then laughed, high and brittle, at the sight of a typewriter for secrets crossing a few feet of dirty water. Relief sounded strange. Around them the Atlantic tried to erase the moment. Waves shouldering over the deck, water slopping into the open hull, scuttling charges already forgotten in the shriek of wind and orders. Nature sided with secrecy. Lemp vanished between swells. Some said shot. Most believed drowned trying to reboard, while Broadway circled with guns elevated, and Obriisha's stern smoked from the last pattern. Command ended without ceremony. Baker Cresswell risked more than a boarding. He ordered a tow, hawser creaking like a man's back as Bulldog gathered way, all 110 staggering along with her bow higher than pride. Courage bet on physics. Attempt salvage. A signal went out in careful code, and then, in a phrase that would live longer than the spray, the Admiralty stamped a name. Operation Primrose. Over the deed and a curtain over the talk. Secrecy took a shape. Below, Balmer's party cleared the WT room, chart table, and the captain's safe as far as breath and nerve allowed, passing damp weight into the boat until the coxswain cursed the freeboard and asked for mercy. Limits returned. Bulldog's priest-like hush began at once. Prisoners segregated, no talk on voice circuits. Deck gossip killed with a look, and a satchel went under lock in a wardroom that smelled of tea and oil. Silence did the work. Hours stretched. The hawser sang. The U-boat, already hurt, settled by inches and then feet, until at last she shrugged off the rope and went down stern first in a clean, slow curve that felt like a hand withdrawing a gift. The sea kept its ritual. Cipher machine documents secured. Admiralty signals would later phrase it. Value incalculable. Capture not to be divulged. Understatement held breath. In Buckinghamshire, Hut aids pencils and bombs met wet paper and found a first. Fast grip on Dolphin, the main U-boat key net, reading traffic that turned convoys inside lines wolf packs had not finished drawing. The wall opened. An entry from the submarine tracking room told the human sum. OB convoy diverted. Reported pack missed by 60 miles. The distance between a logbook line and 40 hulls safe. Ink saved lives. On paper BDU's confidence did not flinch. Ich bin überzeugt. Der Gegner liest unser Funksprüh chi nicht. And Dio Nitz wrote later that Enigma remained secure, his logic stubborn against the arithmetic of empty seas. Belief outlived proof. But on that spray-slick deck, with a wet bag of secrets in a whiler and a black machine lashed under a tarpaulin, an unbreakable system had been reduced to brass, bakelite, and pages, all carried by hands that shook from cold and consequence. Arrogance met reality. The first time the Atlantic gave up a living enigma. The war's hardest cipher sat dripping on a destroyer's table, while the enemy still believed in midnight settings and procedure. A perfect secret learned it could drown. The haul from UA 110 did not end a struggle. It started a tempo, and within days the Admiralty quietly ordered more boardings of weather ships whose reports carried the cribs Hut 8 craved. Opportunity bred appetite. On May 7, 1941, HMS Somali took the German weather ship Emunenchen in the Denmark Strait, and on June 28 HMS Tartar's boarding party stripped the Lauenburg, both seizures yielding Kerr signal, and weather books that made naval enigma sound less like thunder and more like grammar. Paper unlocked patterns. Ultra began to whisper the shape of wolf packs. Positions rendezvous. Retaskings, and Roger Wynn's submarine tracking room bent convoy tracks around plotted nets. As if the ocean itself had been annotated, maps became arguments. Signals to escorts passed in careful euphemism. Intelligence suggests diversion 40 miles north. Because the first rule of the new tool was the oldest. Never let the enemy know what you know. Secrecy overshadowed pride. Action this day, Churchill scrawled on Bletchley Pleas in October 1941. And more bombs, more WRAMs, and more floor space followed, the clatter of drums and relays growing into a sound that meant ships would live. Authority moved faster. BDU adapted with procedure and steel, keys shuffled tighter, discipline hardened, and in early 1942 the Atlantic U-boat net shifted to a 4-rotor Enigma, M4. Triton, which the Allies named Shark, a fourth wheel that turned the old Menus into noise. Darkness returned. In those months the second happy time. Along America's coast burned tankers in the glow of city lights, and even the best British reroutings could not compensate for blackout lessons New York had yet to learn. Ignorance cost blood. Hut 8 felt the door slam. Banburismus scoring dulled. Cribs failed more often, and bombs churned through nights with too many false stops, and not enough certainties. Frustration filled silence. We are blind on Shark. One naval section note admitted in the spring of 1942, the sentence stark beneath careful type, while convoys crossed with more prayer than plots. Humility replaced habit. The answer came not from math but from men again, this time in the Mediterranean on 30 October 1942, when HMS Petard and sister ships hunted U-559 to exhaustion off Egypt and 2 men, Lieutenant Tony Fasson and able seaman Colin Grazier, swam aboard in a slick of oil and night. Courage carried keys. They passed out codebooks by hand to a ship's boy, Tommy Brown, until the boat sank beneath them. Fasten and Grazier went down with the hull, and the survivors brought ashore a wet, perfect lattice of numbers that would fit British bombs like a key to a clenched fist. Sacrifice unlocked a door. By December 1942, Hut 8 was reading Shark, again not always, not perfectly, but often enough to turn rotes and times with confidence, and to feed escort carriers vectors that began in pencil and ended in explosions. Vision returned. BDU tried to hide among procedure. Shorter signals, different Begram tables, stricter destruction drills. Yet necessity forced speech, and every order Dalo Nitz sent to marshal a pack underlined the very line Ultra traced back. Control betrayed concealment. In the Bay of Biscay, weather ships grew scarcer because they died sooner, Avengers and Wellingtons, vectored by HFADF and advised by Ultra's Longview, found trawlers and cut them down before they could freshen the Cypher's cribs. Silence replaced posts. Reports in Admiralty files grew clipped and cool. Rid Dolphin, convoy rerouted. Intended interception avoided. Phrases that hid the chain from a cold boarding to a warm room, and out again to cold water. Economy masked weight. U-570's capture in August 1941, she would become HMS Graf, brought hardware lessons rather than cipher gold battery limits, dive habits, periscope signatures, and the way a Type V Civi smelled and bled when hunted right. Knowledge sharpened knives. The RAF Coastal Command folded into the rhythm with ASV radar and ley lights, while support groups at sea learned to trust both ultras. Big picture. And the shipboard bearing from a Huff Duff, spike that meant a wolf was calling its kin. Domains overlapped. German traffic hummed with undimmed certainty. Ich bin überzeugt. Der Gegner liest unser Funksprauchi nicht. And BDU's KTB entries pinned cause elsewhere air cover, new radar, aggressive groups. Faith explained loss away. But inside British huts, the sense of a woven net thickened. Bombs in rows. Teleprinters spitting intercepts from Scarborough and Iceland. Wrens in headsets reading out numbers that became rotor stops while a duty officer watched the clock on a midnight shift. Network became organism. Every success bred caution. Admiralty orders forbade, pointed. Ambushes that might reveal timely knowledge. And destroyer captains learned to straighten their wakes a fraction when a sinking had been too neatly foreseen. Restraint disguised insight. In German ports, experienced hands thinned, patrol reports shortened, and the psychological weight of being watched, without knowing it seeped through to men who trusted invisible armour. And now feared a nameless leak. Doubt entered mess decks by early 1943, with Shark. Readable more days than not, and the surface nets plotted in chalk, and thread across the submarine tracking room's wall. Convoys felt guided rather than lucky, and U-boats began to find empty water where prey should have been. Absence spoke loudly. Adaptations multiplied on both sides, new bombs ordered, new cribs hunted, new procedures written, new codebooks printed, and yet the curve of fear bent toward those who had once believed their machine was a wall. Confidence turned brittle. The Nazis believed their secrets were safe. By the winter of 1942-43, enough wet pages and careful hands had shown the truth that haunted the next spring. The cipher could be steered around. May 1943 bled into June with convoys that no longer felt blind. Their courses bent by messages read in huts where pencils scratched faster than weather changed. Direction became protection. Ultra fed Roger Wynn's submarine tracking room a living map. Wolf packs forming, re-taskings ordered. Weather routes chosen, and escorts met threats they were never meant to see. Foresight killed surprise. Convoy diverted. Enemy concentration avoided. An Admiralty minute recorded after a midnight reroute, the bland line standing in for hulls that did not burn. Paper hid mercy. Black May wrote the new arithmetic. Over 40 U-boats lost, far fewer merchants sunk, and D. Nitz's war diary conceded the only remedy he had. Die Augenblicklich Hohen Verlust machen ein vor Bergehend Einstellung der U-Boot. Offensive im Nordatlantik notwendig. Withdrawal tasted like iron. Support groups moved like cavalry, their captains trusting bearings and decrypts as much as wakes and weather. Charging to distant squares of sea where a pack ought to be and finding it already uncertain. Hunt started on paper. Escort carriers, Bogue Card, Archer, turned Ultras vectors into launches, Avengers climbing into cloud toward a position that existed first as numbers on a wall. Air sealed the net. HFDF fix, Ultra indicates refueling, Vector Zo 85, 40 miles. A CIC scribble read in pencil before a dusk attack. The chain crisp from a whisper in German to explosions in English. Translation became action. In Hut 8 and Hut 4, bombs clattered through nights, while Wrens called rotor stops and naval section passed BDU's logic for where the next barrier line would form. Machines found cadence. The gains were systematic, not theatrical. Convoys arrived with one fewer obituary and a few more empty torpedo tubes on the other side, and the ledger drifted under the weight of repetition. Victory learned routine. German countermoves tightened procedures, rotated tables, and shortened signals. Yet every order that shaped a wolfpack betrayed a place and time that could be turned against it. Control carried risk. In the Bay of Biscay, Coastal Command stitched daylight patrols across exits, while Ultra highlighted rendezvous and transit lanes that suddenly felt like corridors with doors closing at both ends. Transit became trial. Weak traffic suggests dispersal, convoys Neptune to proceed. An early June 1944 note advised. The invasion lanes guarded by escorts that steered by bearings as much as by buoys. Overlord crossed with quiet. U-boats tried to bite the armada anyway. Gene 8 slid into wakes, and snorkels rose like reeds at dusk, but the sea bristled with sensors and intents that did not sleep. Attempts broke on order. Contact read on Shark. Convoys diverted. SDG sent to intercept. A submarine tracking room strip summarized. The shorthand of 1,000 saved course changes. Brevity spared breath. The human cost threaded every success Lemp lost to grey water after U-110. Fasten and Grazier drowned with U-559's hull as their books rose to hands that would live to read them, and codebreakers in cold huts chased midnight with cigarettes and tea. Clarity demanded lives. On the other side, BDU signals kept their composure. Funk discipline streng Einhalten, while messmates counted empty bunks and patrols stretched longer in submerged silence that tasted of diesel and fear. Routine learned dread. June 1944 brought a symbol as much as a prize when Task Group 20.3 took U-505 intact off West Africa. Enigma and papers came out again in wet arms, and the deck awoke to the notion that even the boat could be captured. Hardware surrendered confidence. By late 1944 the curve was steep, merchant losses falling, U-boat sinkings rising, and Ultra's steady hum underlay every operational verb: divert, vector, intercept, avoid, strike. Trends gained teeth. Admiralty orders kept the edge cloaked, no pointed, ambushes. No timing that would reveal the red. An escort straightened their wakes after neat kills, as if to erase the line back to a translation. Sacrecy preserved advantage. In ports from Lorient to St. Nazaire, new crews learned procedures as if ritual could rebuild luck, and veterans stared at the channel line on a chart, knowing the odds had flipped in a season. Belief thinned. The U-boat arm still cut, still killed, still sent names to memorials, but its freedom of the ocean narrowed to narrow moments, and its confidence never quite returned to what it had been when rotors alone felt like armour. Dominion slipped away. The Allies did not win by miracle. They won by a system that mated decoded words to steel on water and air in the sky, turning a cipher into a steering wheel and a guess into a schedule. Process became power. And in that power lay the new ocean. One where a convoy could sail under an invisible canopy of knowledge, and where a captain could trust a bearing spoken from a hut to mean the difference between smoke and wake. The sea belonged to them. The victory that began in a spray-slick radio room grew teeth in factories, classrooms, and huts where the lights never went out and the tea never cooled. Scale found purpose. Bletchley Park swelled past 9,000 staff by 1945, 3/4 women, huts 6, 8, and 4 fed by miles of GPO teleprinter lines from coastal Y stations that sent German signals inland faster than weather could change. People became throughput. The British tabulating machine company turned out more than 200 bombs in wooden sheds at Letchworth and Eastcote, electromechanical drums that ate menus all night while wrens rode switches and called rotor stops like liturgy. Machines earned cadence. Across the Atlantic at NCR in Dayton, Joe Desch's team built 121 US Navy bombs, vast oil-cooled frames that turned naval enigmas for rotor, shark, from a wall back into a door. America added momentum. Wire stations multiplied like quiet lighthouses. Scarborough, Cullercoats, Scapa, Gibraltar, and posts in Iceland, each with masts and headphones, each throwing bearings and raw intercept into paper sacks and copper wires that led to Buckinghamshire. Listening was mass-produced. Messages received, 4,000 ARPs daily, a Hut 6 duty log noted in late 1942, a bland line that translated into convoys shifted, patrol lines avoided, and ships that would not be listed under, missing. Numbers hid lives. The Admiralty submarine tracking room under Roger Wynne resembled a hive, charts webbered with coloured threads, ultra-decrypts pinned by time, HF or DF bearings chalked in arcs. A clerk's pencil could move 40 holes 20 miles north by midnight. Plywood became horizon. Marconi and STC assembled FH.4 Huff Duff sets by the hundreds, Adcock aerials sprouting from destroyer masts so every convoy carried ears as well as guns. Listening rode steel. Shipyards matched the tempo at sea. Britain launched nearly 300 Flower-class corvettes and over 150 River-class frigates, while the United States welded more than 500 destroyer escorts and over 100 escort carriers. Protection found hulls. Liberty ships, 270-10 of them, crossed in files with holds full of avgas, magnetrons, and spares, the cargo that kept bombs clattering, radars humming, and escorts fueled to answer bearings at Euro 200s in sleet. Supply made certainty. Signal schools, HMS Mercury and sister establishments, trained wireless operators to copy fast hand, Wrens to run bombs, and RN officers to read most secret, with the discipline of silence. Skill was manufactured. Action this day. Churchill's scrawl on Bletchley Please became budgets, billets, and steel racks for more drums. By late 1942, the bomby outstations at Eastcote and Stanmore sounded like rain on a tin roof at midnight. Authority turned into noise. On the German side, printers at naval depots issued fresh Kengruppenbach and Kursignal heft. Signals schools drilled funkmate in brevity and care, and yards completed type their secular and IX hulls under a clock that no longer favoured them. Industry strained uphill. On Verlust and Erfenen signed unersetzlich. A BDU staff note conceded in 1943. The loss of experienced men is irreplaceable, and the human arithmetic cut deeper than any table of keys. We lose one. It's gone forever. Dealer knits rotated keys, tightened destruction orders, and rolled out M4 with new bigram tables. But every improvement demanded new books, new training, and more chances for wet paper to land in the wrong hands, during 15 frantic minutes on a canted deck. Fixes bred risk. The Allies hid their edge with method. Ultra routed through Hut 4 to fleet signals with euphemisms. Intelligence suggests diversion, and Admiralty orders forbade. Pointed. Ambushes that might reveal a current raid. Secrecy protected harvest. In Coastal Command, ASV Mackay. FE sets and lay lights came off production lines in numbers that turned night surface attacks into gambles in Western approaches. Support groups formed on paper and sailed with doctrine that treated bearings like orders. Instruments multiplied intent. The bomby rooms grew hotter, their oil-scented air thick with relay chatter. Wrens marked stop lists, engineers cleared faults, and duty officers checked crib lists as if inventory were a weapon. Routine wore wire. By 1943-44, the system's weight told everywhere at once. Decrypt spooling, bearings crossing, escorts turning, carriers launching, and the ocean's surprise shrank to minutes between a German order and an English course change. Latency became leverage. Workshops, classrooms, wards, and masts made a whole, an avalanche of steel and paper that did not look dramatic up close, but moved mountains when counted by convoys saved and enemy boats that never arrived. Scale carried quiet power, and under that quiet, the truth hardened into a rule the enemy could not see. If your war depends on messages, your enemy will build a factory to hear them. An industrial thunder learned to read. For 3 decades after the boarding, the sea kept its quiet pact, and men who had carried a wet bag of pages or tuned a bombie at midnight said nothing beyond medals with careful citations. Silence guarded victory. David Bulmer's DSO read, like any other commendation, for gallantry in action. And Captain Joe Baker Cresswell's mention in dispatches spoke of seamanship, without naming the black machine lashed under a tarpaulin. Credit hid in plain sight. At Bletchley Park, Hut 8's pencil lines faded on brown folders, while the official verdict was simply that convoys had been lucky and escorts tireless, a story true enough to live with and false enough to protect the source. Secrecy became habit. Diorio Nitz wrote in 10 years and 20 days that Enigma remained secure, that Allied successes must lie in air cover and tactics, and earlier wartime lines in the BDU diary. Ich bin überzeugt, der Gegner liest an sehr Funksbrüche nicht, kept their tone even after the ledger turned. Belief outlasted evidence. When Frederick Winterbotham's The Ultra Secret appeared in 1974, and the fetters came off, the shape of the campaign tilted in public memory, and what had looked like a string of brave guesses in grey weather resolved into a system with wires, rotors, and hands. Revelation redrew maps. Naval Enigma's story was never simple. It opened after UA-110 and the weather ships closed with the 4th rotor, and opened again after U-559's night off Egypt, when Tony Fasson and Colin Grazier passed a last wet sheaf to young Tommy Brown and did not surface. Courage paid the bill. Documents recovered from U-559 enabled the resumption of reading Shark. Historian F.H. Hinsley later wrote with clipped exactness, mapping sacrifice to effect as the bombs found rhythm again in the winter of 1942. Cosmet consequence. Brown received the George Medal before dying in a house fire in 1945, and the 2 men who drowned received the George Cross. The tiny print of their citations sits beside the huge arithmetic of convoys saved by pages they lifted in the dark. Honour measured loss. In Admiralty files the old euphemisms remain. Intelligence suggests diversion, and the doctrine Dowding-like in its restraint, not to be revealed by subsequent action, reads like a sermon to captains who had to sail between truth and appearance. Discipline stayed moral. Historians argue about numbers, how many sinkings prevented, how many days saved, and the careful estimate that Ultra shortened the war in Europe by perhaps 2 years floats between footnotes. Impact resists precision. But a convoy commander's memory has no footnotes. It has the line, course altered 8 points at Euro 200, uneventful afterward, and the knowledge that uneventful was the point. Safety felt like emptiness. Across the Atlantic, U-505 lives ashore at the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, her steel cool under museum lights, her radio room intact. Enigma keyboards quiet under glass as children peer in and try to imagine a message turn to light. Hardware holds ghosts. At Bletchley Park, a bomby drum still turns for visitors, the clatter becoming a kind of music in a hut, where photographs show rows of wrens with headsets and pencils, the human engine that turned cribs into courses and secrecy into saved hulls. Industry found a face. The German side keeps its own rooms of memory, names carved at M. Lottenort and Kiel, patrol badges behind glass, and a sorrow edged with pride for men who went out into an ocean that grew stranger as their faith in invisible armour thinned. Defeat kept dignity. Naval signals today inherit both traditions, radios that never sleep, cryptography with more states than stars, and a standing lesson that procedures are only as strong as the moment a hatch opens and a hand reaches for a book. Practice must face chance. The legacy reaches beyond SALT, into the ethics of intelligence used with restraint, into the quiet craft of direction finding and code breaking, into the idea that the best victories are those the enemy never understands. Wisdom wears understatement. Those who were there recall small details. A lampboard's dust, the smell of battery acid, the feel of paper gone heavy with seawater, and the moment the war moved because those details moved first. Memory lives in objects. In that alchemy of brass, bakelite, discipline, and luck, a cipher that felt like a fortress became a door, and the ocean's wide anonymity shrank to a map laid in pencil and kept behind locked drawers. Mystery became method. The story endures because it pairs an engineering miracle with a human one, a black box of letters with a boat, a storm, and a choice to board when scuttling seemed certain and time seemed gone. Choice mattered most, and so the war at sea remembers a day when the Atlantic rose, a hatch opened, and the idea of an unbreakable secret slipped into a satchel under spray and silence. Because the Nazis believed their secrets were safe. Then a crashed U-boat revealed everything.